Hello everyone, and by everyone I mean all you Outer Wilds cultists that wish you could play the game again for the first time. Welcome in. So, I recorded this a few years ago, but I'm just getting around to editing it now. Before we start though, I need to give a few disclaimers. First, if you haven't played Outer Wilds before, stop watching this. This game is too special to spoil it for yourself. Go play it first, then you can come back and watch as many Outer Wilds videos as you want. Second, now this is a big screw up on my part, but I somehow managed to break my translator tool. May have been a bad install, or maybe I messed with config files that I shouldn't have. I'm still not entirely sure. Either way, the translator didn't work. My apologies if this makes you want to yell at your screen. Since then I've gone back and played the game properly and watched countless playthroughs on YouTube, so I know the feeling of screaming internally at the streamer butchering your favorite game. Finally, in another rookie mistake, I lost all the mic audio for these recordings, just completely unusable. I did realize my F-up pretty soon after I finished the game, so to try to salvage it, I immediately watched my footage back and recorded what's essentially a commentary track of my thoughts and what was going through my head at the time I played it. Now that it's been a few years, I'm going to finally stop procrastinating and tackle the absolute mountain of editing it's going to take to cut this down into something watchable. I hope it comes out okay. With all that out of the way, let's get to it. So, a friend of mine recommended this game to me. They were like, hey, I know you like sci-fi and mystery puzzle box shows, so I really think you should try this game. It's called Outer Wilds. It has a really unique physics system, and the concept of the game is it's kind of like an escape room, except instead of trying to escape a room, you're trying to escape a time loop. And because it's like an escape room, once you know how to solve it, you can't really play it again. So whatever you do, make sure not to Google anything or look anything up. Just play the game. If you get stuck, move on to something else and you'll eventually figure everything out. And I'm like, okay, say no more, I'm sold. Sounds right up my alley, definitely interested in playing. But hypothetically speaking, let's say you're someone that before you start a new game, you dig into the config files and look around at all the settings and various different things. And hypothetically speaking, let's say before you started playing Outer Wilds, you went into the config files and accidentally unbound the key to use your translator tool. Well, shit happens. So, yeah, I kind of fucked up. I played this entire game not being able to translate any text, and yeah, let's, I guess just get into it and see exactly how that went. So one more note, and another stroke of bad luck. When I first recorded this, I guess I had my OBS settings fucked up or something, because all of my mic audio from my recordings completely gone. And some of the game audio and spots dropped out too, but you know, I can edit around that, it's fine. So what I'm going to do instead, this is going to be a little different. Instead of watching my, first time playthrough and reaction, I'm just going to take the gameplay recordings I have and then go back and more or less do like a commentary of what was going through my head at the time that I was discovering everything. So it's a bit of a blessing and a curse. It's a curse for me because it's way more editing than I was planning on doing, but in the end, I hope it'll all be worth it. And a blessing for the audience because playing this game without the translator tool took me a long time to figure everything out. Without all the text hints pointing me in the right direction or telling me what I was seeing. So I imagine it'll be pretty tedious to sit through however many hours it took me to finish the game finally. But yeah, gonna go with the supercut option and hopefully everything works out well. Wake up. So the first sight in the game I was greeted to was a green planet in the sky with some type of space station that looked like exploding and a blue orb shooting out from it. Bit confusing at start, but then I panned down, looked around, and noticed a campfire and the option to roast a marshmallow. Now, it's been a long time since I actually roasted a marshmallow over a fire, but what I like to do is try to keep it away from the fire, rotate the stick slowly so you get a nice even cook, and try to get it to a nice golden brown. Like that. So sitting next to the campfire was a four-eyed alien-looking creature whose name was Slate. From Slate, I learned that I'm an aspiring astronaut about to take off on my first voyage. And then we were introduced to one of the main mechanics of this game is dialogue options. And in this case, my options were all systems go, I'm ready if you are, and you're sure you fixed the retro rockets, which is the one I picked. To which Slate retorted, that was only a problem one time, then maybe a few times after that. But hey, no reason to dwell in the past, right? And then he instructed me to get the launch codes from Hornfels at the observatory. So looking at Slate, noticing he's a four-eyed alien, looking at myself, it appears that I am also an alien. When I looked back up, it had become daytime, and some really nice acoustic guitar music started playing. Speaking to Slate again, he had more dialogue options this time. Slate had me concerned a little bit that he had been tinkering with my ship I'm supposed to take off on, adding an extra oxygen tank to use as a booster, which sounds like it might be explosive. Then he insulted my piloting skills, and Slate's last remarks was to talk to the rest of the villagers to say my goodbyes before I leave. Moving over to the ledge, a button prompt told me to hold and release A to jump, which is a bit of an odd mechanic for games. Normally it's just tap to press, but roll with it, I guess. The first villager I encountered was Micah. They questioned if I was still planning to blast off into space, and I decided to ask if I could see the model ship before I left. Micah told me I could try it out and to try to land on one of the geyser pools. Flying the model ship was a bit difficult at first. But once I figured out to not press the right thumbstick to roll the ship, things got a little easier. I don't know if anyone remembers that old school Flash game called Lunar Lander, but it was a bit like that. You need to make subtle movements and just kind of tap the trigger to keep in the air, kind of like Flappy Bird. And once I figured out that, it was pretty easy to land on these geyser pools. I proceeded to walk into the rest of the village, which was very rustic and cozy. From here, I had conversations with the many villagers I found, so I'll sum up what I learned from them here. From Porphy, I learned that our species likes to get turned up on some sap wine. Porphy also indicated that there are many structural collapses and house fires in our village. From Rutile, I learned that our space program is a bit reckless and tend to create explosions and fires. Next to Rutile, I found a mini museum of different things about the space program. The Outer Wilds Ventures Postcards from Orbit exhibit taught me how to use the Sky Shutter satellite by pressing left and right bumper to take snapshots. A different exhibit told me about Feldspar, who was the first astronaut to fly into space. From Marl, we learned that the launch pad is flammable, which was a bit concerning. From Nice, we learned about the travelers and their different instruments. Chert plays drums, Rybeck has a banjo, and Gabra plays the flute. And then the other astronaut, Feldspar, plays a harmonica that they've been missing for a long time. Then I ran into two Harthian children, Tefra and Galena. They wanted to play hide and seek with me. This section was a basic tutorial on platforming skills and using the signal scope. Once the signal scope was equipped, I could look around to look for different signals. As you got closer to a signal, the circle would begin to get smaller until it formed a perfect circle. And when you were directly facing a signal, it would start to play music. Now, as any gamer knows, there's always a secret behind the waterfall, and Outer Wilds was no different. I climbed and jumped up beyond the waterfall to find Tephra. Then I set out to find Galena. The other signal appeared to be coming from this house, so I used my platforming skills to jump over. And I found Galena on top of a outcropping, hiding with the radio. Continuing to climb upwards, I ran into Spinel by the waterfall. They regaled me with a far-fetched fishing tale, and from which I learned that Gabbro is on Giant Steep, and Giant Steep has a current you can't pass through. Continue to climb up past the waterfall and out of the crater that our village is located in. Once at the top, there are many things to explore. The first thing we came across was a Harthian child throwing rocks at a strange glowing green light. Arcos informed us that this weird green light is called ghost matter, which evaporates eventually, but it takes a very long time. Ghost matter is apparently very dangerous and will burn the heck out of you. By the patch of ghost matter, there was a sign that gave us more information about it. Ghost matter is deadly and also invisible to the naked eye. However, we can detect it by using a camera. Playing around with the camera next to the ghost matter, it was evident that when taking a picture of it, ghost matter glows green in the camera viewfinder. At this point, I noticed another waterfall, and curiosity got the better of me. There's always a secret behind the waterfall, right? So I jumped in to check it out, and turns out the secret was death. But wait, no, there's stuff down here. There is a secret behind the waterfall. And then I died. And that's how I got my first Dark Souls end screen. And the credits rolled. Then I got kicked back to the main menu, and there was no continue option. Much to my surprise, all I could do was start a new expedition. So at this point I was thinking, oh, this must be the time loop aspect of the game that my friend was talking about. Like, if you die, you just have to restart the game, so you're kind of like stuck in a time loop, right? And I thought that's pretty hardcore for a game. I really wasn't expecting that kind of mechanic, but, you know, whatever, roll with it. I talked to Slade again, but he didn't have anything new to say, so it did appear that my game was truly restarting. I just couldn't leave well enough alone and decided to check out the geyser to see if I could get a better look at what was inside. And then this happened. The geyser flung me far into the air, and I came crashing back down at terminal velocity and died again. Yeah, at this point I was starting to get a feel for what this game was going to be. Between dying violently twice now and all of the villagers telling me about how dangerous everything is, how many explosions there are and fires and death and destruction, I started to get the idea that the point of the game was to try to actually launch out in space without dying. And I started to think, well, if I ever do get to my ship, as soon as I launch, it's probably going to explode and I'm going to die. So I need to find clues around the village and talk to people and maybe find objects or things to add to my inventory so I can fix the problems and blast off into space successfully. Yeah, that makes sense, right? That's probably how this game works. Time loop. Got it. The villagers didn't have anything new to say, so I headed back up to where I left off. Tektite left a note stating that they saw smoke coming from Young Bark Crater. On the platform above, I found a mounted scout launcher surrounded by different notes. The notes marked the directions of different landmarks. To the north was Youngbark Crater. To the northwest were Geyser Mountains. To the south was the Quantum Grove Crater. And to the east were the Nomai Ruins. Out of all the signs I read, the Nomai Ruins sounded the most interesting. So I pointed the scout launcher in that direction and took a look for myself. What I saw in the scout looked like old Roman archways leading into a mountain. By a sign pointing to the observatory and the Zero-G cave, I found a note. Gossin stated that if I wanted to get some Zero-G training, I should go see them. At first, I thought Zero-G cave must be some kind of metaphor, because how can there possibly be zero gravity inside a cave? Talking to Gossin, I admitted that I was a little nervous for my first flight, seeing as at this point I was fairly convinced I was going to explode in a ball of fire. Then Gossin asked me to repair a satellite, which was definitely not just a piece of broken mining equipment, down in the Zero-G cave. I rode down a very long elevator into a mine shaft filled with rocks that sparkled like the night sky. Because there's no light down the cave and the minerals in the rocks sparkle, it made it appear as if the cave was lit up with stars. But once I turned on my flashlight, I could see that it was indeed just sparkling rocks. By a sign pointing up to the Zero-G cave, I found a spacesuit and put it on. The spacesuit enabled my user interface, from which I could see an oxygen gauge, a fuel gauge, a health bar, a gravity indicator, which currently stated that there's 0.4x gravity, and also gave me a jetpack I could use. The jetpack was controlled by pressing left trigger or right trigger to thrust up or down, and then moving the left thumbstick to go in the XY directions. Gravity was definitely less in the cave than it was up top, but it still wasn't quite Zero-G. Until I came down to this section and found myself in the very center of the planet. Navigating this space was a bit difficult, as continuously pressing forward on the thumbstick seemed to just throw me about in space. It took me a little while to figure out, but once I realized this game was using Newtonian physics, things became a bit easier. With the Newtonian physics engine, momentum is conserved. So unless there's an equal and opposing force to oppose your momentum, you'll continue to move in whatever direction you're heading. Locking onto an object allowed me to hold A to match my velocity to the object, which essentially freezes me in place. What's interesting about this space is, because this planet is rather small, we were actually in the core of the planet. And because the core of the planet was completely hollowed out, that means that all the mass around us was equally pulling on us from every side. And because all the mass is pulling on us equally, that results in what is effectively zero gravity as long as you're inside the hollow core. Using my knowledge of Newtonian physics, I made slow, steady movements toward the broken piece of the satellite, pressing A to match my velocity as I went. Holding X allowed me to repair the broken piece of the satellite. I would later learn that this was a tutorial for how to repair your ship while you're in space. It took me a little while, but I finally figured out that the third broken piece of the satellite was coming from inside the satellite itself. And once I repaired it, the tutorial completed, and my training simulation was complete. Once I flew back out of the cave and gravity was restored, my orientation adjusted itself so that my feet were facing towards the ground, which was helpful. I returned my suit to its storage place and then headed back up the elevator. Gosson congratulated me and then instructed me to get the launch codes from Hornfels at the observatory. Continuing down the path, I finally came upon the observatory, which was filled with exhibits that I would later come to appreciate as tutorials. Outer Wilds Ventures was founded by Hornfels, Gosson, Slate, and Feldspar. Feldspar was the first Hearthian to be intentionally launched into space. The use of the word intentionally means that other Hearthians previously had to have been unintentionally launched into space, and given my previous experience with the geyser, I had a feeling I knew exactly how that happened. Feldspar also made the first orbit and landing on Timberheart's moon, the Outer Rock. The statue in the museum gave us our first glimpses of the species that predated the Hearthians, known as the Nomai. They dwelled in the solar system several thousand years before the Hearthians did. Unlike the four-eyed Hearthians, the Nomai had 3 eyes and were covered in fur. The Hearthians have no idea where the Nomai came from or what happened to them. Getting a better look at the statue, the Nomai appear to be a species of goat people. The only other thing my friend told me about this game is that there is a new exhibit in the museum that kicks off the DLC for the game, and that I should avoid that exhibit until after I'd finished the main game. So after reading the sign, I figured out that I should stay away from the radio tower on Timberhearth and the deep space satellite that's orbiting the solar system. The exhibit with the balls on a flat surface indicated that the balls move on their own, even though the surface is completely level. What causes them to move is the gravity from the moon. The Outer Rock's gravity pulls on objects from different directions, and it's even pulling on us. As I would come to appreciate later, my friend had mentioned that there was a unique physics system in this game. The way the system worked is that each planet in the solar system has its own gravity that's determined by the mass of the planet. And the game uses this mass to calculate how much gravity each planet should have, and each body actually pulls on you based on what its gravity is. The only exception to this rule is the sun, which still has gravity, but it actually works on a linear scale in the game instead of the exponential scale the sun works on in real life. Otherwise, it would be a bit too difficult to navigate when flying close to the sun. By an exhibit that was a model of the sun, we learned how supernovas work. Stars like our sun generate light and heat by fusing hydrogen to helium. As it grows older, the star runs out of hydrogen and starts to contract. As the star's core contracts, it gets hotter, causing the outer layers to expand. The star has become a red giant. When the core is hot enough, it starts to fuse helium into carbon. If a star is massive enough, it will continue to fuse carbon into even heavier elements like iron. Ultimately, the star will collapse under its own gravity and then explode in a violent event called a supernova. Based on Chert's observations, this will one day be the fate of our own sun. There were some pictures on the wall that had showed me some things that I had seen and not seen. This picture reminded me of the Nomai ruins I had sent the scout to and saw those Romanesque looking archways. This picture appeared to show some type of spaceship on a rocky desert planet close to the sun. At this exhibit, I found a gravity crystal that was taken from a Nomai ruin on Brittle Hollow. These crystals create a local gravity distortion that was most likely used to traverse steep surfaces. When I walked towards it, the crystal inverted my gravity so that my feet were now firmly planted on the wall, and I could rotate around the museum in ways that were a bit dizzying. Moving away from the crystal returns gravity back to normal. In this exhibit, I found an anglerfish that was discovered when it attached itself to a landing gear of a ship that flew too close to dark bramble. Anglerfish are well suited to living in dark places with minimal atmosphere, and they look super creepy. From this exhibit, we learned that the Harthians have been bootstrapping their way to spaceflight by taking Nomai technology they discovered, reverse engineering it, and then repurposing it to fit their own needs. For example, the little scout is able to be retrieved by using the Nomai's warp technology. An exhibit on a Nomai skeleton informed me that the Nomai had very different bone structure and physiology than the Harthians do, so Harthians couldn't have descended from Nomaian ancestors. We still don't know where the Nomai originated from or why they disappeared. This exhibit was the one that gave me the most headaches due to my prior messing around in the config files. According to the sign, the exhibit displayed an example of Nomai writing, and that I had a translator tool that could translate what the writing says into something I could understand. However, when I quit my translator and tried to press right bumper to translate it, no matter how many times I pressed it, it wouldn't translate. At this point, I was thinking, okay, standard video game fare. I guess I have this tool, but maybe I need an upgrade or something later that I'll find that'll allow me to translate text. Maybe after I see a bunch of these, I'll gather the data I need to develop the technology to translate it, or maybe I'll find a character that'll give me a module for my translator that'll make it work. Maybe I'll find someone else in space that'll give me that knowledge. I don't know. That's what I was thinking at the time, but pretty much I was thinking, video game upgrades makes sense. We'll get it later. On the exhibit, there was also this blue symbol, which I didn't really know what to make of at first. I'm not exactly sure when in my playthrough I came up with this theory, so I'm just going to put it up here at the front. Eventually, my brain kind of went to this symbol kind of looks like a representation of the Big Bang, or, how the universe started. So that was my theory, that this symbol represents the Big Bang. It represents the center of the universe, the origin of the universe. Throughout the playthrough, I'm probably going to refer to those terms interchangeably to refer to the symbol, either Big Bang, center of the universe, origin of the universe, stuff like that. In an exhibit in the outside, I found a strange purple rock. The sign informed me that the strange rock appeared to react to conscious observation. Gabbro claimed that the rock exists in all possible states until it is observed, and though the Harthians couldn't agree on why the rock moved around, they did agree that the effect is extremely creepy. So what I discovered here was a bit of a Schrodinger's rock. When you're not looking at it, it disappears. Why I'm calling it Schrodinger's rock is like Schrodinger's cat as a way to explain quantum physics. Essentially, the way quantum physics works, not really, but the way quantum physics in pop culture works is quantum particles exist in several different states until they are observed, which locks them into a single state. So by not looking at this rock, it exists in all three of those states it could possibly exist in, on top of all three stumps. When I turn around and look at it, it gets locked to a single state. And so long as I keep my eyes on it, it won't disappear. But as soon as I look away, it moves to a different location. I had checked out all the exhibits in the museum, so I decided to head up the stairs. At the top, I was prompted to press X to view a map, and I was quite surprised when it zoomed out to show the entire solar system. I explored this map for a while and was able to discover several different things. Our planet is called Timberhearth, and its moon is the Addle Rock. Closest to the sun, there are the Hourglass Twins, which consist of a binary planet system of Ember Twin and Ash Twin. I noticed a weird object in a very close orbit around the sun, but didn't know what to make of it. Moving further out, there was Brittle Hollow, with its volcanic moon, Hollow's Lantern. And even further out was Giant Steep, which had an orbiting space station that looked a lot like the one I saw explode the several times I had woken up by this point at the very start of the game. Really far out from the sun was this strange glowing white orb with orange meteors surrounding it that I didn't really know what I was looking at, but it seemed pretty cool. And then in the furthest orbit was a planet, if you can call it a planet, called Dark Bramble, that appeared to be dark and brambly and looked like some sort of weird wooden vine with ice on its exterior. Looking at the entire solar system, I was starting to doubt my earlier theory that the game was just about trying to blast off into space successfully without dying, because why would they include all these detailed planets and things if I wasn't meant to explore them at some point? But I still had my reservations. Finally, it was time to talk to Hornfells. They stated that conditions were good and I was all ready to get off the ground. Hornfells asked me what my plan was once I was in space, and it took me a little bit to think of what I wanted to answer, but eventually I decided that I'll start with something small. Hornfells suggested I make a visit to the Addle Rock to check in on Esker, and to also check out the ancient Nomai ruins on the moon, since no one knows what they are. I was left with one final dialogue option, and given my proclivities about how dangerous this village would be and my previous 2 deaths, I said, I'm ready to die in space. I went to leave the museum, but then something weird happened. What the fuck? Did anybody else see that? No? Nobody? Anybody? The statue opened its eyes, it started glowing, and then it stole my memories. That was weird. But onward. As I headed towards the launch tower, I was stopped by Hal. I had told Hal that the statue opened its eyes and started glowing. I was insistent that there was something weird with the statue. They suggested I could try to go to Gabbro on Giant's Deep to get more information on the statue, but Gabbro may not be the most reliable source of information. Just before I got to my ship, Tefra was waiting to say a final goodbye, and had some very creepy thoughts. That's pretty disturbing. The interaction with Tefra further cemented my idea that something terrible was about to happen to me. And finally, Slate saying that the autopilot's avoidance system was broken was not reassuring. But I had the launch codes and I could finally use the elevator to access my ship. Now that I was finally on the launch pad, I got to behold the ship in all its glory. And by glory, I mean rinky-dink, ramshackle, jury-rigged awfulness. I mean, look at this thing. It's held together with wood and duct tape and bungee cords. Not exactly instilling a lot of confidence. If I wasn't certain that I was going to die when I blasted off on this thing before, I pretty much was now. But now that I was in the ship, I could take a look around. The cockpit was made of wood and seemed very flammable. There was a cheeky little sign that at the time I thought was sarcasm, explaining how oxygen refills work. Just spot a tree, walk towards it, and enjoy. In this alcove of the ship, I had access to a suit of my very own. And behind the suit, I noticed a cool little explainer for how the little scout works. You can use the little scout to see behind the horizon by taking pictures, illuminate dark areas, detect hazards, or test the environment. Now, much like in real life, when you lose one sense, your other senses tended to get stronger. And because I didn't have a translator tool at my disposal, my other tools had to do double duty. So in this, my signal scope and more importantly, my little scout became my best friends in learning how to understand and make sense of the world around me. By looking at this rack, it appears that I could replenish my health and fuel by coming over here. There was a map of our solar system over by the ship's computer. Over in this corner was one of those gravity crystals, which I assume is used to create artificial gravity in my ship, even when I'm in space, so I don't float away. And finally, there was the ship log. The ship log displays all of the planets in our solar system and records entries on things we've discovered in those locations. I didn't have much unlocked at first, but as I played the game, the ship log filled out more and more and became crucial to understanding what was going on in the game. By pressing Y, I could access the rumor mode, which turned the ship's log's entries into a red web conspiracy theory board, Charlie Day Always Sunny meme of information with entries scattered about connected by lines to what they're related to. I sat down in the cockpit, getting ready to blast off, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the ship was going to explode violently. So, rather than do that, since I now had a spacesuit with oxygen reserves, I decided to head back down into the geysers that I jumped down earlier to get a better look at what was inside of them. Once I was in the geyser pool, I was able to get a closer look at the things I had previously gotten a glimpse of. It appeared that the Harthians in the village used the geysers as a type of trash dump and were just throwing random stuff in here. Whether that was on purpose or accident is hard to say, but either way, I didn't find anything terribly interesting down here. As I continued to explore in the flooded caverns, I did notice something that was intriguing, but appeared to be a current of water rushing into a hole. I swam towards it and was swiftly sucked away. First, it took me past geyser pools, and I was lucky to not be swept up in them. The current spit me out in a new space with a single geyser pool. I blasted myself up to get a good look around, but fearing death, I tried to land back in the same hole I came out of. The next underground river spit me out into a new space that had some Nomai writing on the ground that I, of course, couldn't translate. But it also had a mural that depicted what looked like Nomai in spacesuits around a pond admiring some blue four-eyed amphibians. Based on context clues, I assumed that these four-eyed blue creatures were Harthians far prior in their evolutionary cycle. So the Nomai had to have been in the star system long before Harthians came around, or at least were evolved to the point of intelligence. The final current spit me back out of the village. The entire underground river network seems to make just a giant loop. So, with nothing left to explore, I waited for a geyser to push me back up to the surface. Now that I had a jetpack, it was much easier to avoid dying on impact. Since I didn't see anything obvious to interact with or ways to progress the story, I decided to stop being such a chicken, head to my ship, and blast off. This was it, the moment of truth. Would I die in a violent explosion, or would I be able to successfully blast off into space? Much to my surprise, the ship took off, and nothing bad happened. I was just in space. And now that I was finally in space, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I look back at Timberhearth and realize there are still a bunch of things on my home planet that I wanted to explore. Flying the ship wasn't too bad. Now that I knew this game was based in Newtonian physics, I just tried to make subtle little movements and keep my speed under control, lest my momentum fling me out into the farther reaches of space. I performed an orbit around the planet, and I found what I was looking for. The Roman archways and what appeared to be the Nomai version of that cool S you would draw in middle school. I thought it would be pretty lame if my first landing was on my same planet as I took off from, so instead of landing and checking that out, I decided to continue orbiting the planet to see what I could find on the surface. Our village looked quite quaint from up here. I noticed a giant crater with a smoking fire. There was a very large geyser mountain. And there was also a smaller crater with some trees and geysers in it. While orbiting the planet, I tried to get a better understanding of what was going on with my user interface. When you lock onto a planet, a bunch of different information is displayed. The name of the planet, along with the distance to the planet, and your current speed appear to show up on the right-hand side. When I was moving towards the planet, my indicator would be blue, and when I moved away from the planet, the indicator would be red. I also noticed two white arrows to either side of the planet. The arrows took a little longer to figure out, but I noticed whenever I tapped left or right trigger, the arrow on the bottom would grow or shrink. And when I tapped left or right, the arrow on the left or right would grow or shrink. I deduced that these arrows represented my relative velocity to the object I'm locked on. And the bigger the arrow was, the more velocity I had going in the opposite direction. At this point, I also noticed that there were some button prompts on my screen for various tools. If I pressed right bumper, I could bring out my scout launcher to launch a scout and take pictures. And if I pressed Y, I could equip my signal scope. I spent some time playing around in space looking for the various signals of my fellow astronauts. But when I looked back, Timberhearth had gotten quite far from me, so I decided to try out the autopilot feature. By pressing up on the D-pad, I was able to engage my autopilot, which first aligns my flight trajectory, then accelerates towards the destination. And then when it's roughly halfway to the destination, it kicks in the retro rockets to slow me down so I don't crash violently into the planet. At this point, I had done enough fucking around, so I decided to try my hand at landing on the Attlerock. By pressing X, I could switch to a takeoff and landing mode, which would come to be very useful when trying to land on planets with my ship facing right side up. Moving very carefully and gently, I was able to set my ship down on the surface of the moon. My first landing on the moon was a success, and I was feeling pretty good about it, but since my ship hadn't blown up and I had yet to die, I was a little confused about what the point of the game was. Since I could have sworn it was a time loop game about trying to escape the village, the fact that I successfully escaped the village with relative ease left me puzzled about what it is I'm actually supposed to be doing in this game. Rather than dwell on these thoughts, I got out of the ship and decided to take a look around. I landed next to a Harthian spaceship that seems to have crashed on the moon. Almost certainly one of Feldspar's endeavors. There wasn't much gravity on the moon, so it was very easy to fly around. I also spotted a Harthian flag and posed for a photo opportunity with Timberhearth in the background celebrating my accomplishment. While I was floating around in space, I remember hearing whistling coming from the moon, so I took out my signal scope and had a look around. I followed the sound of the whistling, which led me to a small encampment on the moon, and a Harthian astronaut in a rocking chair. Surprisingly, this astronaut didn't seem to have a suit on, which would make sense later, since in this universe, oxygen just emanates from trees, and as long as you're near a tree, you can breathe. Bringing out my signal scope and getting close, identified the signal as Esther. Before I talked to Esther, I decided to have a look around his camp to see if there was anything I could interact with. I found a supply of jetpack fuel, which was handy, and a rocking chair with a great view of the solar system. I started to talk to Esker, and then something strange happened. What exactly is going on with the sun? I quickly exited out of the conversation to try to get a better look. And then a giant blue ball of death came hurling towards me. I tried to run away from it, but it didn't do me any good, and I died. But strangely, when I died this time, I didn't get end credits, I didn't get kicked back to the main menu, I saw this strange Know My sculpture that played my memories back to me of everything I had done. And then I was back at the campfire. But I didn't have to click new game. This game's just getting weirder and weirder. So I talked to Slade again like I had for the past 3 lives. And this time, he did have something different to say. Did I just die? Whoa, bad dream or something? You still look half asleep, but that's a negative on being deceased. Slate thought we were just being nervous and jumpy because of anticipating the launch, but no, I definitely died. Because when I tried to get onto the elevator, I still had the launch codes. Finally, things were starting to click in place, and I realized this must have been the time loop my friend was talking about. However, now that I had one question answered, I still had much more to explain. The primary one in my mind being, what the hell just happened? Why did I die? What happened to the sun? Did it explode? I had no idea what was going on.